She's written multiple best-selling books, as I'm sure many of you know, and now she has valiantly come out and put out a new book, The End of America, and she also has written an essay called Fascist America in 10 Easy Steps. And we have links to Amazon.com where you can get her book and a lot more up on Infowars.com. Naomi Wolf, thanks for coming on with us.
Thank you so much, Alex, for having me.
When did you start to wake up to the police state that's really accelerated its expansion under the Bush administration in the last 7 years?
Yeah, well, it was definitely not something I wanted to think about, but I have a friend who's the daughter of Holocaust survivors, and she kept insisting when we talked about news events that they did this in Germany, and I was sure that this was, you know, very extreme, irrational talk, but she finally forced me to sit down and start reading. And, of course, I discovered that she wasn't talking about National Socialist outcomes, you know, 38, 39, 40. She was talking about 1930, 31, 32, when Germany was a parliamentary democracy, yes, a fragile one.
The Weimar Republic.
Exactly, but a small group of people began very systematically to use the law and dismantle the Constitution and put pressure on citizens to subvert the law, and that opened the door for everything to follow. And then when I started reading this, I saw that not only were tactics and strategies being reproduced exactly right now by the Bush administration, but that actual sound bites and language and images and scenarios and sort of film moments are being reproduced. And then to, you know, summarize quickly, I looked at other times and places where a would-be dictator, whether on the left or the right, wanted to close down a democracy or crush a pro-democracy movement. And I looked at Italy in the 20s, I mentioned Germany in the 30s, Russia in the 30s, East Germany in the 50s, Czechoslovakia in the 60s, China's crackdown on the democracy movement in the 80s, Pinochet's coup in Chile in 1973. And what I saw, Alex, was that there is a blueprint. I mean, that everybody who wants to close down a democracy does the exact 10 things, they're 10 classic steps, and that unfortunately, I'm sorry to say, we're seeing each of these 10 steps being put in place in the United States today.
But I'm sure you know this, and I haven't finished your book yet, and I'm wondering if it's in there, that Prescott Bush was actually the head Nazi agent in the U.S. The McCormick-Dickstein committees exposed this. The guy that was about to be the Marine Corps Commandant, Brigadier General Smedley Butler, they tried to hire him to overthrow the government and set up a fascist dictatorship. So to see Bush even calling it Homeland Security, it was Fatherland Security there, setting up a Homeland Security, which is the Gestapo/SS. I mean, they're really going down the line. And then when you learn, and I'm asking, did you know this, that the Bushes actually got their first seed money from Fritz Thyssen, the man who bankrolled Hitler? Yeah.
Yep. Well,
Comments?
I have to say, as you're speaking, you know, I'm very rarely at a loss for words, Alex, but I'm so kind of overwhelmed with emotion from what you just said, because you're the first mainstream talker to say this truth, which is, you know, historically 100% accurate and profoundly important for people to understand.
I appeared before the Congressional Committee to tell what I knew of activities which might lead to an attempt to set up a fascist dictatorship.
Some very shocking documents that I saw at the Library of Congress had to do with the hearings of the McCormick-Dickstein Committee of November 1934. Show that Prescott Bush and the DuPont family, the Remington family, and J.P. Morgan tried to overthrow the U.S. government, assassinate FDR, and put a Hitler-style fascist state in place.
This is J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI for nearly 40 years. He has recently been criticized for being gay and a cross-dresser. He has been criticized for a long time for being a racist, but you have to admire his skills as an investigator. Hoover investigated the Nazi connections of all these people and brought actions against them. For example, Hoover investigated the Nazi connections of Union Bank of New York. And in 1942, the year the U.S. entered the war, the bank was seized as a Nazi asset. Prescott Bush, the president's grandfather, was a director and chief executive officer of that bank. And when the U.S. government grabbed the bank, he protested. He said, "Wait a minute, that's my bank." Hoover said, "That's right. No mistake. You're a Nazi, you run a Nazi bank. So Hoover knew that Prescott Bush was a Nazi. This is going to be extremely important later, so please make a note to yourself. Hoover knew that the Bushes were Nazis. But let's get back to this guy, Prescott Bush, the president's grandfather. He was a co-director of this Nazi bank with this Nazi, Averell Harriman, his boss. Prescott Bush was also a full partner in Brown Brothers Harriman. They were the closest of business associates. Remember the trial of E. Howard Hunt, where the jury found Hunt guilty of the murder of President Kennedy? During this trial, Hunt testified that immediately after World War II he was in Paris working directly for Averell Harriman, reporting directly on a daily basis to his boss. So the Bushes run around in a tight circle that includes other Nazis and Kennedy killers. A truly evil circle of friends. Of course this doesn't prove that the Bushes killed JFK, but it ought to provoke some investigation on our part. So let's do some investigating. We just saw that in 1942, Hoover forced Prescott Bush to give up his active political support for his favorite young politician, Adolf Hitler. However, 4 short years later, he found another young man to sponsor in politics, Nixon, who is documented as employing Jack Ruby a year after this photo was taken. Nixon, who hired Hunt, who hired Connally, was created and sponsored from the very beginning by Prescott Bush. Are you surprised? Well, you better get over it in a hurry. This barely readable piece of paper was declassified by the FBI in 1977 and released. It's a memo written by J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI. The title is Assassination of President John F. Kennedy. It is about a meeting that took place between the FBI and the CIA the day after the assassination. The memo names George Bush as one of 2 CIA officials sent to get Hoover's report on the activities of the CIA's misguided anti-Castro Cubans. The memo was a scandal when it was made public in 1988 because it says that George Bush was in the CIA in 1963. It says that Bush lied when he told the public that he had no CIA experience before becoming director in 1974. It means he was in the CIA when he ran for Senate and lost in 1964, and when he ran for Senate and lost in 1970. And it means that he was in the CIA when Nixon brought him into the White House, trailing E. Howard Hunt behind him. Spotlight magazine published an article citing a memo written by this man, former CIA Director Richard Helms, which places this man, an admitted CIA assassin, in Dallas on the day that Kennedy was murdered. The memo says, Hunt was in Dallas the day the president was murdered and was involved in the conspiracy to kill Kennedy. Hunt sued Spotlight magazine for slander and had his day in court. Hunt's explanation of where he was on the day that Kennedy was murdered was a disaster of impossible lies. Over the years, Hunt has given 5 different explanations of where he was on the day that Kennedy was murdered, and the jury found him guilty of the president's murder when they found the magazine innocent of slander.
Here you go, the first national airing of the testimony of E. Howard Hunt from January of 2004.
I heard from Frank that LBJ had designated Cord Meyer Jr. to undertake a larger organization while keeping it totally secret. Cord Meyer himself was a rather favored member of the Eastern aristocracy. He was a graduate of Yale University. I think that LBJ settled on Meyer as an opportunist, Perrin like himself, Perrin, and a man who had very little left to him in life ever since JFK had taken Cord's wife as one of his mistresses. I would suggest that Cord Meyer welcomed the approach from LBJ, who was, after all, only the vice president at that time. And of course, could not number Cord Meyer among JFK's admirers. Quite the contrary. I was a bench warmer on it. and I had a reputation for honesty. I think it's essential to refocus on what this information that I've been providing you, and you alone, by the way, consists of. What is important in the story is that we've backtracked the chain of command up through Cordmeyer and laying the doings at the doorstep of LBJ. He, in my opinion, had an almost maniacal urge to become president. He regarded JFK as he was, in fact, an obstacle to achieving that.
If I was president, if I was president, if I was president, if I was president.